I'd like to ask unanimous consent to put into a record a study by the Nonpartisan Center for Media and Public Affairs that found that coverage on Fox News was more balanced than any other network, and also a public policy polling survey that found that half of Americans trust Fox 10 percentage points more than any other network. One more sentence, please. And a separate poll by McLaughlin and Associates found that 36% of Americans list Fox as the most trusted source of news about politics and government, by far the highest total of any network. ABC, CBS, NBC, and MSNBC each receive less than 7%.
Yeah,
That was Texas Republican Representative Lamar Smith praising Fox News during Rupert Murdoch's testimony at an immigration hearing back in September of 2010. Due to intense public pressure late last week at the House Judiciary Committee hearing, Lamar Smith was forced to postpone markup on a bill he introduced, the Stop Online Piracy Act, until after the congressional holiday recess. However, since Congress has decided not to recess to work out the extension of the payroll tax cut and unemployment benefits, the committee has decided to push forward with markup this week, while the general public is now busy preparing for the intense holiday weekend. Proponents of SOPA claim that the legislation will curtail online piracy. Paul Almeida, President, Department of Professional Employees of the afl-cio, speaking at last month's judiciary hearing in support of SOPA, claimed, "The First Amendment does not protect stealing goods off trucks." However, opponents worry that non-infringing content will be taken down alongside infringing content, violating First Amendment rights. In 2010, House sponsors of Stop Online Piracy Act received $1,476,596 from the TV, movie, and music industry. Much of the support for SOPA has come from the entertainment industry, including the Motion Picture Association of America, the Recording Industry Association of America, and Viacom. Earlier today, we interviewed Julian Sanchez, a fellow at the Cato Institute, a think tank based in Washington, D.C. Smith has written several articles about the potential issues that would arise if SOPA is passed.
Well, I mean, the stunning thing about this particular proposal is actually how many unrelated reasons make it a kind of appalling idea. I mean, the goal, combating online intellectual property infringement, is valid in itself, but it simultaneously, creates a mechanism for censorship of entire web domains, including potentially both copyright infringing and, in many cases, perfectly legitimate speech together without prior restraint, without, or as a form of prior restraint, without a finding pursuant to an adversarial hearing, which the Supreme Court has repeatedly found that the First Amendment requires. An adversarial proceeding resulting in a final judgment before speech can essentially be silenced. We've seen, for example, in connection with obscenity rulings, that a book or a newspaper can't be removed from circulation just on the basis, for example, of a probable cause showing a violation. It needs to be, a final hearing where both sides are allowed to be heard and present their arguments before you can silence speech. Independently and apart from the First Amendment concerns, there are technical concerns. One, that it really runs against the grain of the open architecture of the internet by requiring internet service providers to implement blocking, which is something that China and Iran and other countries that nobody thinks we ought to emulate have done, but is actually really quite rare in liberal democracies. And indeed has the effect in practice of making it very difficult to implement a protocol called DNSSEC, which the internet community has been developing for 15 years now with strong support from the US government, which has been, again, very strenuously pushing this protocol as a mechanism for securing the domain name system, for ensuring that when you go to, mybank.com, it's your bank and not someone somewhere in the chain of communication between you and your bank, which the way the internet works, your communications pass through a lot of different points. It's a way of making sure that nobody who is able to sit at one of those intermediary points can fake my bank or Facebook or some other sensitive endpoint and steal your information. And the problem is that the way they've decided to implement this would effectively break that, because it would require a lie. It would require you to ask, where is, piratedomain.com? And it would require your ISP to lie about that, to either fail to answer completely or to give a wrong answer. And the whole point of trying to build security into the internet in this way is to prevent you from being lied to. And so if you...
And when you say, really quick, when you say lie to, who is doing the lying in this sense?
So in this case it would be, in a lot of cases it's hackers. In this case it would be your ISP under orders from the government. The government says, when you try to get to a particular website, it either has to lie to you about where that website lives, or it has to fail to answer completely. And then a well-designed application can do one of two things. It can fail, or it can look for a verifiable source of information about where that website lives. And the way the law is written, a well-designed, secure application that tries to get reliable information when it sees what looks like an attack will circumvent the law. And so the law creates problems. Now the law says if you want to design a secure application, just building it correctly will involve circumventing this block. Who will implement that? And if nobody implements it, the domain name system won't be secured. It also creates a rule that says the people who make the circumvention software that our government has for years said is the right answer for people living in China or Iran who want to speak about democracy and human rights should use, because our government has actually, in some cases, funded this software. But this law would actually technically prohibit it, because software that can get around China's firewall can get around this firewall too. So the question is, if you're a programmer trying to consider, should I contribute my efforts to this circumvention program to help dissidents in China and Iran, will I be blocked in the US? Will my software basically be banned? Because, if it can get around China, it can get around this.
So essentially, the government has been promoting a type of way to get around censorship in these other countries that are technically non-democratic countries that have been censoring freedom of speech. And here we have a similar case where now people could be censored, and if anyone in the United States wants to use this technology that the government has been promoting in other countries, they will be doing that illegally in this country.
The thing interesting is actually you don't even need, our government is actually wonderfully not willing to go as far as China does, so you don't even actually need that software. To get around the blocks they're talking about, their method of blocking pirate sites, you need to be clever enough to click a link to install a plugin, or to open your browser settings and change your default DNS host to something overseas. This is something that, anyone who is involved in piracy, anyone who has installed BitTorrent, for example, is also capable of installing this little plugin or making this little change to their settings. It's not going to stop anyone from pirating music or movies.
Do you think overall that this infringes on freedom of speech?
Absolutely. Look, it's very clear, again, that the Supreme Court has rejected the idea that an entire publication, and they were talking about books and magazines, but it applies, obviously, just as cleanly to an entire web domain, which can include, a web domain can include not just hundreds or thousands of pages, but hundreds of different sites. We've seen cases where domains have been taken down because of one subdomain and leading to thousands of innocent blogs being taken down because they were shared on the same underlying domain. The Supreme Court is very clear that you can't remove a publication from circulation without a final judgment pursuant to an adversarial proceeding. And this throws that out the window and, more importantly, creates an architecture, right? I mean, there's like a high cost to pay here. They got to get 70 pages of law through. They have to get a lot of thousands of US ISPs to buy in to software that will implement their big blacklists to automatically blocking sites as the courts hand down rulings. But once all those costs are paid politically and technologically, it gets very easy suddenly to block speech in a way that it wasn't before. Now you have to pass a whole big law, a big controversial law, and get all these sites to build in technology for blocking. But in a year, once the law is in place, well, it takes a single sentence that you tack on to an omnibus budget, a little rider that nobody notices, that adds another offense and another offense that will trigger the requirement to censor. And all those ISPs, all those DNS providers, have the machinery in place. So if you change the law, they are ready to comply if now classified information, or information harmful to national security, or information derogatory to the ability of the U.S. to execute whatever it is they decide is the next thing to be blocked, it will be dirt simple to implement in a way that it's hard to implement now. That's bad civic hygiene. That changes the cost and benefit of implementing censorship in a way that's bad for our rights as a democratic society.
Representative Smith introduced SOPA to the House floor late October 2011. Murdoch and News Corp have strong ties to Viacom, which has, over the last couple of years, been taking legal action against YouTube for alleged copyright infringement and is in support of SOPA, putting Smith's motives for introducing the legislation into question. SOPA is scheduled for markup in the House Judiciary Committee on Wednesday morning, December 21st. This ends our report. This is Margot Paez signing off for Insightout News. Goodbye.